So this has been one of those sermons that's been difficult for me to write. Not because I've been lacking creativity, but been lacking the ability to wrap words around the thoughts bouncing around up here. Sometimes that happens, actually frequently that happens for me. So yeah, in this sermon, well, I say all that because there's a reason why I'm not recording in the sanctuary. I've rewritten and tweaked this, and it's Saturday night at 7:30, and this is supposed to go out tomorrow morning for Sunday morning. So it is what it is, right? We'll make the best of what we can during this season. And just a fair warning, I've been reading a good bit of philosophy these days, so bear with me. This will be more of a philosophical type sermon than most are. So yeah. The name of the sermon is called The Common Good, to quote Paul directly, and it's a reflection on Paul's teachings on spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 1 through 12. If you would like to read that beforehand, probably would be wise to hit pause. Next week I'll incorporate the reading into the video, but this week, just given I'm still adjusting to being virtual again and this way. So yeah, but this is a reflection on Paul's teachings on 1 Corinthians 12, in 1 Corinthians 12 on spiritual gifts. So one of the greatest philosophical dilemmas of all time, one that has pretty much plagued us human beings ever since our ancient ancestors became evolved enough to weave together two thoughts in their brains for the very first time. This great philosophical dilemma is what many philosophers would call the problem of the one and the many, the problem of the individual versus the collective. You can go back into ancient Greco-Roman writings and find this problem being debated amongst philosophers back then even. And it's still being debated amongst philosophers and smart folks even today. So what's this debate about? It's basically in things like politics and religious belief and economics. The question is, what is more important? Focusing on the well-being of the individual or focusing on the well-being of entire communities, of an entire society, for example? Should we structure our policies around the individual pursuit of happiness and individual rights, or should we structure our policies around collective happiness and the rights of an entire people group or society? I mean, this whole issue, it's still at the heart of most political debates, in my opinion, in this country, even now. I mean, you hear it all the time. Republicanism or democratic socialism. There's some strong opinions on there, and it's really, at the heart of it, it's really a debate about what's more important, the one or the many, right? Libertarianism or Marxism or anything that's kind of on that spectrum. What's the better political view? People debate this. They debate this question. Is it right for the government to tax us individuals more so that more people can benefit from our hard-earned money, right? I'll put quotes around that. I'm not going to give an opinion at this point. Another question that's debated is this. Are government handouts just, or are they somehow muddying the waters of what it means to have individual rights? Is it dampening our notion of freedom in this country, right? Yeah. I'm not going to get into the weeds of all this political stuff, but you can see the tension that's there, right? It's a constant tension that we still wrestle with today. Well, Christians, especially in recent centuries, from what I gather, we have really erred on the side of one or the other of this whole one versus the many, the individual versus the collective debate. And I guess it depends on what country you're in, that's which side you'll err to, right? Or what you're reacting against politically. That's the side you're going to, fall in line with. And a lot of the problem is that we modern Christians today, we tend to either baptize the things that we hear on CNN or the things that we hear on Fox News, whatever your particular flavor is. And the problem is that we let our political leanings influence our theology more than we let our theology influence our political leanings. But here's the thing. Ancient Christians named this debate for what it is a long time ago. They called it a false dichotomy. We don't have to choose between the one and the many. It's very clear in the writings of the church fathers. It's very clear in the Apostle Paul this morning. Whenever it comes to the question of the one or the many, the individual or the collective, what's the priority? The answer for us should always be yes. Yes, both please. Thank you very much. But we've wandered from this ancient wisdom, unfortunately, because we're too busy baptizing Fox News or CNN, in my opinion. So how about a little thought experiment to help us overcome this dichotomy? Tell me, my friends, what's the most important line in the Apostles' Creed? And if you need to hit pause and Google Apostles' Creed or flip the pages of your prayer book to get there, do it. Is there one line that is more important than all the others? Are there some lines of the Apostles' Creed that are more important than other lines? For example, is the line, I believe in God, the Father, the Almighty, more important than the line about belief in the one holy Catholic Church? What do you think? Or how about this? Is the line about the belief in Jesus Christ any more important than the line about belief in the communion of saints? The answer is no. No. One line is not any more important than the other because it's all one package. It is one faith being expressed in a multifaceted way. It is simultaneously an expression of the one and the many. The Apostles' Creed, my friends, is not a smorgasbord of unrelated one-liners, some of which can be kept while the others are discarded. No, to not have faith in the saints or the church, for example, is in a very real way to not have faith in God. To reject part of the creed is pretty much the same as rejecting all of it. In other words, you can't pick and choose which parts you want to believe in and which parts you don't want to believe in because it's all one belief. It's kind of all or nothing. As one Nobel Prize-winning physicist once said, if you pick a flower on Earth, you move the furthest star. Everything is interconnected. Well, the same is true of our creeds, our Apostles' Creed, our Nicene Creed. Those are the big two for us, right? If you uproot faith in the communion of saints or the church, it shifts the other things around completely as well, because the creed presents itself to us as one harmonious narrative, not as a collection of isolated dogmatic truth claims. In other words, to understand any one line of the creed, you need to understand the whole. You need to see that one line in relationship with all of the other lines. And having faith in people, in community, it's an essential expression of what it means to have faith in God. It's all one package. Now, I know that many people today, in the pews and outside of the pews, they take issue with the creed, or the creeds, I should say. Their spiritual gag reflex is triggered because they feel like the creeds are just narrow dogmas that are being hurled at them by the powers that be in the institution, and it's really just like cramping their style and thwarting their sense of self-expression and individuality. That's what's said, at least. That's the sentiment. But I'm starting to suspect that this whole notion of dogma, that this is not the main reason as to why people are prone to rejecting the creeds or certain parts of them. I think this is merely the issue that's named because people don't know how to dig down and get to the heart of the real issue, the deeper issue, and name that instead. But I'm starting to suspect that their rejection of the creeds, or parts of the creeds, it has less to do with dogma and it has more to do with narrative, with a story, the idea of a story. Again, the creed presents itself to us as a unified narrative. It's an invitation to not only listen to a story and acknowledge it, but it's also an invitation to become participants in this story. The creed is a story. It's a summation of the gospel. And our belief, it takes its shape from within this collective story, from inside of it. This is why we say we believe in, I believe in. We're within the story. And it's from within that story that our belief takes shape. Thus, the creed, it's not about affirming our belief in certain facts about God, but it's about acknowledging that our faith comes alive from within the context of this mysterious story that we share with God and others. So the problem then isn't that the creed is dogmatic and that we modern Americans don't like dogmatic stuff. I mean, there's some truth to that, but again, I think the issue is actually much deeper than this. The problem is that the creed gives an overarching narrative to those of us who live in a society where we have been indoctrinated into believing that any and all types of overarching narratives should be rejected or oppressive, right? And we have erred so far to the side of individualism in this country that people today, they don't have a collective story to live by, to belong to orient their lives around, a story that fills their lives with meaning and purpose. We're not accustomed to belonging to anyone else's story other than our own. I mean, if we're lucky, and this is only if we're lucky, we know how to say, this is my story. But we no longer know how to say, this is our story. One of the great casualties of modernity is that in being stripped of a collective narrative, a common story shared with others, we've also been stripped of the parts that we could possibly play within a common story with others. In other words, whenever we lose our sense of connection with others and where we're all going together, we also lose our sense of individuality. So many older generations, they look at younger generations today and they scratch their heads and they say, what's wrong with young people today, younger generations today? I got this question like a billion times when I worked as a youth minister back in St. Louis. I still get this question frequently. I can tell you what's wrong. What's wrong with younger people today? I'll tell you what's wrong. This is just the tip of the iceberg even. It's that we don't have a common story that binds any of us together. And because of this, we don't have a sense of belonging to much of anything. We're like puzzle pieces without a puzzle. And we have inherited a philosophical tradition that outright tells us that we ultimately don't know where this life is heading. And because of this, we don't know what life is all about. To use Aristotle's language, we don't have a goal. We don't have a telos that we're all journeying to together. Therefore, we don't know actually how to go in any specific direction. It's entirely up to each individual person to figure it out as you go. And you just kind of make crap up and you hope for the best and cross your fingers, right? That you'll somehow cultivate some sort of meaningful life. And we don't know what roles we are to play. And without knowing our roles, we also don't know how to make life meaningful. We don't know how to measure success because we don't know what life is about or where we are heading together. As Aristotle also said, it's easier to achieve your aim if you actually have a target. Well, younger generations have inherited a country that has removed all meaningful targets from public aim. And if there is such a thing as the common good, we don't know how to define it, nor do we know how to contribute anything to it. For we've been taught that the very idea of holding anything in common with other people, that's one of the greatest philosophical heresies of our era. We are indoctrinated into believing that commonality with others, that's one of the most oppressive forces against our individuality, and that freedom is all about severing ourselves off from others and the stories that they tell and the ways that they see the world. But deep down, though, I think most younger people, younger generations, would really like to contribute to the common good. But again, there's no common to contribute to. At best, there's just a conglomeration of individuals. And we don't know how to define the good that can be contributed. Without a shared vision of reality, the good cannot ultimately be known. We're just making up our own goods as we go. Yeah, we have no target, which is why so many of us are aimless. My friends, the scandal of Christianity is that it is audacious enough to tell us that there is a common narrative, there is a target, there's a common narrative that we all can belong to. St. Paul tells us this morning that there's a story that we can be baptized into, one that will fill our lives with meaning, purpose, and hope. We can find our individuality in the midst of a unified diversity, in the midst of community, and we can know the roles that we can play. We can find our calling in life, that there is a community where we can learn what it means to contribute to the common good. We can define both common and good. And there's a context where we can learn how to manifest the divine by manifesting the fullness of our God-given giftedness. St. Paul, he doesn't see the church as an institution as much as he sees it as a community, a radical community, where we can truly discover what it means for us to be, to find our existence, to find the deepest core of ourselves. We can discover our being by participating in the church's story, in God's story, together, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And in this story, everybody has an important role to play. Everyone is invited to manifest the divine in their own unique way. Paul says that there are spiritual gifts that are latent in each of us. But whenever we come into this communal story together, God activates these diverse gifts so that we can all manifest them for the common good. So in the church, we're meant to learn how to be practitioners of the common good. We're to learn how to manifest the divine and to offer up our unique gifts for the betterment of the many. And we learn how to live for somebody else other than ourselves. And then we come to find out that this is actually what life is supposed to be about all along. Living for others. Making the world a better place than the way we found it, right? And we learn how to harmonize our individual stories with God's grander cosmic story. It's not about God's story versus our story or our story versus God's story. It's about both stories happening simultaneously. Just like how the Apostles' Creed is not a list of isolated individual dogmatic statements, but one story, so too the church is not a collection of isolated individuals, but we are one body. We are one in many simultaneously. And just as the creed is one faith being expressed in a multifaceted way, so too the church is one spirit being expressed in a multifaceted way through us, the one in the many. Interestingly enough, the word that Paul uses here, when people geek out in this text and go deep into studying spiritual gifts, they usually focus on just like the individual gifts that Paul lists: wisdom and knowledge and healing and speaking in tongues and prophecy, all of that stuff. We tend to focus in too much on the minute details that we miss the bigger picture. And we tend to not look at the very definition of the word gift itself that he offers up. So the word that Paul uses here for gifts in this text, in talking about spiritual gifts, is literally the word charisma. It's where we get the word charisma from. It's literally the same word. We find our charisma, our vitality, our unique way of manifesting the divine, the image of God within us, our very personhood. We find our charisma only in communion with God and one another. Paul is not giving us a vision here of how the church could be better administered. No. He's giving us a radically different vision of reality itself, a subversive, radical philosophy that rivals nearly every aspect of American culture today and most cultures today. For in Paul's vision, a person who seeks to live only for themselves, he says they're like a hand that's cut off from the rest of the body, just lifeless flesh, basically. They're like a foot saying to an eyeball, I don't need you, I'm good, thank you very much, right? Paul's vision of reality, it's far more holistic and well-balanced than anything on offer today. There's a lot of really radical progressive philosophers who are actually gravitating towards St. Paul, which is really interesting. There's a movement, especially in Europe, where this is happening. But in Paul's vision, he sees a world where those who are gifted with wisdom and those who are gifted with knowledge, they're coming together and proactively shaping each other. They're communicating with each other, right? They're in communion with one another. His vision is one where those who dedicate their life's work to healing people, they're in conversation and fellowship with those who are dedicating their life's work to bridging racial and language barriers. It's amazing. Everything's coming together as one. And most of all, Paul is saying that we cannot find ourselves, that we cannot discover our true selves apart from community, apart from those divine relationships that are seeking the common good. But this is an ancient wisdom that unfortunately we modern people have completely lost sight of, those of us inside the church and outside. People no longer have a context in which to define themselves and find themselves. And most people who come to church today, I don't think they think about the church this way. It's just tragic. And modern people, we've been taught that we have to define ourselves over and against others. That self-definition is about separating from others, not about being in relationship with them. And as a result, we are all hands cut off from a body, right? From the body. And in a world where there is no body, just a bunch of hands, being a hand makes absolutely no sense, because a hand makes no sense unless you first understand how it's meant to function with the rest of the body. Yeah, which is why so much of life makes so little sense for so many people. My friends, how would it change what we're all about in the church if we could get to the point where we could all see the church is something more than just an institution or a tradition, something more than just a group of like-minded religious individuals? Like, what if we actually saw the church through Paul's eyes, with Paul's faith? What if we had faith in the Holy Catholic Church again, in the communion of saints again, in the way that Paul had faith in it? And what if we saw the church not just as a place to go to and to pray and to worship, what if the church became for us a place where we could encounter our deepest selves and our roles in life, our calling, where we could encounter a narrative that is so much bigger and so much grander than anything we could ever possibly imagine for ourselves? I don't know about you, my friends, but I can't help but imagine, I can't help but think that this change would change just about everything for us and for those outside of the stained glass walls as well.